Hi, this is Erin Broadbent, and this is my Mod 13 case study for EDL 851, Supervision and Evaluation of School Personnel. A quick recap of the case study. It takes place at Crestview Elementary School. We know that Mrs. Wilson is a third-year principal. Before that, she was a classroom teacher. To get her degree to be a principal, she took some night classes for 4 years. We also know that Mrs. Horton is a first grade teacher. She, at one point, had won an award to be Teacher of the Year. She is a seasoned professional, so she's been teaching for a while. We know that suddenly she begins to appear to be more stressed, and she's less friendly. Staff members say she's less friendly. Students are making complaints, and also parents are making complaints. We also know that there is a parent meeting. A parent wants to move their child from the classroom. The principal, Mrs. Wilson, wants to discuss things first, and that meeting goes very poorly and ends with Mrs. Horton having an outburst. So what do I know? I know that Mrs. Horton is our seasoned teacher. I know she teaches first grade, and I know that she's recently had a change in her behavior. I know that we have a newer principal, Mrs. Williams. Not only is she a new principal as a profession, but also for that district and in that building. We know that Mrs. Williams has tried talking to Mrs. Horton. We know that she kind of has talked a little bit about attitude over the curriculum that Mrs. Horton didn't agree with. We also know that parents have complained. We know that the superintendent is aware of the problems. It says that the superintendent has actually reached out to Mrs. Williams, the principal. So the superintendent is getting phone calls from parents as well. We know there was a parent meeting between the teacher, principal, and the parent. That parent wants his child, Julie, to be moved. He also was complaining that Mrs. Horton had ignored attempts to have a conference with his wife. We know that Mrs. Horton exploded on the parent. She kind of slammed her fist down and yelled in front of the parent. And therefore, Mrs. Williams decided to stop the interview or the questioning, the meeting, and said that it was going to be postponed and a decision would be made at a later date. There's still some stuff that I'd like to know with this case study. I want to know, what really did Mrs. Williams say to Mrs. Horton? Did she only talk about Mrs. Horton's attitude over the curriculum change, or did she talk about her attitude in general? Kind of what all got said during that time. I also would like to know if Mrs. Williams has taken the time to ask Mrs. Horton about her home life. Mrs. Williams heard from other teachers that Mrs. Horton's husband had left her. But does she know that from Mrs. Horton? Has she taken any time to ask her how she is and what's going on in her life? I'd like to know if there's any district opportunities that would support mental health. Are there also any adult witnesses to the alleged abuse of students? And I'd also like to know the number of students in class. Is this a small class, a very, very large class? Is there any additional support in class, like a paraprofessional? And then I really would like to know Mrs. Horton's thoughts as well. Does she agree that there's a problem? Does she know that slamming her fist on the table was inappropriate? Because if she doesn't, that could be a sign of something else as well. And if she does, then we can kind of discuss from there of, well, then why did you make that choice and what can be done? So what is the problem? And the problem is that parents are complaining. And I think that that's kind of your first and foremost problem of dealing with what are they complaining about. Then you also have the problem of how Mrs. Horton behaved during the meeting with the parent. Raising your voice, slamming your fist on a table is never okay to act that way in front of a parent. And then also Mrs. Horton's attitude about the school, about the classrooms, the students, the curriculum, what might be going on in her life, all of that kind of rolled into one is another problem as well. So my proposed plan of action, number one, speak with Mrs. Horton one-on-one. I think it's very important as principal to take the time to spend with her and show her that I care about her, that I'm interested in what's going on, and that I'm invested in what's going on. I'm not just listening to other staff members. I'm not just listening to complaints, but I'm taking the time to listen to her. I would like to set up an action plan and begin a growth or improvement plan. Within this plan, there would be set meetings, goals, and expectations. At our meetings, we would be able to see, is Mrs. Horton making gains towards our goals? Is she meeting the expectations? And kind of see what maybe needs to get tweaked and what needs to get changed and how things are going. Myself as principal, I would call the parent and apologize. And then in a separate phone call, I would make Mrs. Horton call the parent as well. I believe that it's important for her to take ownership of her behavior and her actions. I would also then invite the parents that were at the meeting as well as other parents in to see the changes as they occur in the classroom. Resolve the issues based on promoting the success of all students. Once this issue with Mrs. Horton's behavior is resolved, it's really going to change relationships. The relationships between the students and Mrs. Horton. Right now it sounds like that's pretty strained as students are saying that she's not treating them kindly. And so I think that if we can get her back to being her happier self and treating them nicer, that they will then in turn change that relationship and begin to confide in her and talk to her and enjoy being in her class, which then affects the parents and Mrs. Horton's relationship. I think that if their students become happier with how things are going in the classroom, then their relationship with Mrs. Horton will also improve. Also, the staff and Mrs. Horton's relationships. I can't imagine that those are good right now, and so if things can change with her and she can get some help and changes that she needs, I think that that would improve their relationship as well. Obviously, there would be some personal changes for Mrs. Horton, whether she chooses to get some counseling or take advantage of medication or mentoring programs or anything like that. It would result in some sort of change for her. And then there would also be less tension in the building, between students, between principal and teacher, parents and teacher. Just kind of all of that tension could be gone. As I read this case study, I had several thoughts. I really wanted to know what happened to Mrs. Horton. The fact that she just really seemed to change her behavior overnight shows something happened to her, and perhaps it was just her divorce, but perhaps it's more as well. I want to know if the students have truly been mistreated. I think that, if they have, different action needs to be taken, and there needs to be administrative action, write-up, possibly even termination if she's actually physically abused children. If she's speaking to them unkindly, working together to fix that relationship, maybe bring in the counselor and have her help. But seeing how those students were genuinely mistreated or genuinely treated. I want to know if the principal, Mrs. Wilson, is supporting enough. She lets it go on for quite a while that the teacher's attitude has changed. And so I just kind of want to know, does she not know what's going on with her staff? Does she not care? Where's the support from her end? And then also, is the district supporting enough? As I read the case study, I thought a lot about my current district that I work in, and mental health is a really big deal. They offer all staff 5 free counseling sessions per year. And so it's nice to have that support if someone needs it. And so I'd like to know if this district is supporting Mrs. Horton and the other teachers as well. As I read the case study, I had lots of different feelings as well, and I was sad for Mrs. Horton, but I was also concerned for her. She at one time was Teacher of the Year. That's not something that's just kind of arbitrarily handed out. So she's obviously been an effective teacher in the past, and something has happened. And so I did feel very sad and concerned for her. I also felt concern for the students. School should be a safe place. And it sounds like right now they're not feeling safe at school and they're not enjoyable. So kind of worry for them, worry that the impact this might be having on staff members and therefore other students. Are other staff members taking it out on their students? Are there siblings? Are there, kind of how does this affect the entire school, if at all? And then concern that the principal isn't involved enough. I think that this should have been addressed last year when the behavior first started changing. And Mrs. Wilson should have gotten involved then and shown that she does care about Mrs. Horton at that point. I really was valuing the fact that I currently work with an administrator that I know I can talk to. I can go in her office at any time, shut the door, and talk to her. I can call her at any time. I can email her at any time. She is always there to listen. And as I had already mentioned, being in a district that really supports mental health. As a counselor, it's really nice because I know that my district really values my job, but then also knowing that they value counseling for everyone, and so they want us to get outside support if we need it, and they want to be there. They recognize that teachers are humans, and we have things going on in our lives, and our mental health is important, just like the students is, and we sometimes need some outside support. I also value having teams and buildings that you can lean against and help. I'm finally in a district where I have a team of counselors, and while they're not in my building, they're in my district, and I can call them at any time, and I can meet with them, and I know that they're there to help me, and that's a really nice feeling that if I started acting differently, there would be quite a few people that would notice and say, hey, what's going on? What can we do to help? Obviously, still some unresolved issues. What's going on in her life and what can be done? If it's a divorce, then that's what it is. And as principal, I'm not going to be able to make your husband stay with you. So how can I help you work through that? Because you have to deal sometimes with life events. There's nothing we can do to fix those. How is the principal, school, and district, how are they able to help Mrs. Horton? And I think that each three of them can play a different role, and the principal can provide things inside the building, but then also give some resources for the district as well. Mr. Stafford had wanted his daughter moved, so we don't know if she's going to be switched to a different class. We don't know if he will accept his Mrs. Horton's apology, and we don't know if he's going to go run and tell other people. Today's day and age, social media is huge. Facebook is huge. Is he going to go and blast this all over the internet, bash the teacher, and are there going to be then ramifications for that as well? As educational leader, I can promote academic success for my students. Scared students can't focus. They're not going to learn academically. They're not going to have good behaviors. If they're scared, they're not going to be able to do anything. So as administrator, I need to give them a safe classroom to be in. The parents who don't buy in, parents who don't believe the teacher has changed, parents who don't believe their children are being treated right, equals students who don't buy in. So I need to be able to gain back the trust of the parents and show them that their children are safe all day long. I also think that it will be important that as administrator, I am making sure that Mrs. Horton is planning effectively. And so does she have good, solid lesson plans and executing them well and teaching those academics effectively so that the students are able to learn? For their personal well-being, scared students, they're shy, they're nervous, they're quiet. They probably aren't interacting with one another very much. Their attitudes at home, their sense of belonging, not only the students, but Mrs. Horton as well. My guess is she's not feeling a sense of belonging anymore in her building. I can help with a welcoming and safe environment, again, for the students and Mrs. Horton as well. They all need to feel safe. They all need to feel welcome. And as administrator, by making some changes, by getting on a growth